The massive doors of the Galactic Council chamber slid open with a soft hiss. Ambassador Zethkara stepped through on trembling legs, her blue skin pale with exhaustion and fear. Behind her walked two other Villani delegates, their usual proud bearing broken by months of desperate travel across the galaxy, seeking help that never came. Captain Jake Morrison sat in the Earth delegation section, watching the alien ambassador approach the speaking platform. He had known Zethkara for 5 years. Ever since humanity joined the galactic community, she had been the first alien to welcome humans, teaching them about trade routes and diplomatic protocols. Now she looked like she had aged decades in just months. The chamber held representatives from 47 different species. The Altrani sat in their crystal pods, their gaseous forms swirling with what Morrison had learned to recognize as boredom. The insectoid Thekri clicked their mandibles impatiently. Even the massive Gorvani, usually respectful of all speakers, seemed more interested in their data tablets than the Villani representative. Commander Lisa Parker leaned over to whisper in Morrison's ear. "Look at them. They already know what she's going to say and they don't care." Morrison nodded grimly. The Villani crisis had been building for 8 months. Everyone knew the Kruath Empire was systematically conquering Villani space, enslaving entire populations and strip-mining worlds for resources. The galactic news networks covered it like a sporting event, with detailed analyses of Kruath military tactics and speculation about which world would fall next. Zethkara reached the speaking platform and activated the universal translator. Her voice, when it came through the speakers, carried a tremor that made Morrison's chest tighten with anger. "Honored delegates of the Galactic Council," she began, "I stand before you today not as an ambassador of a proud species, but as a mother begging for her children's lives." The chamber fell silent except for the soft hum of life support systems. Even the board delegates looked up from their tablets. 3 months ago, the Kruath Empire invaded our outer colonies without warning or declaration of war. They bombed civilian targets, destroyed hospitals and schools, and rounded up survivors into labor camps. When our diplomatic vessels tried to negotiate, they were destroyed on sight. Morrison had seen the footage. Kruath warships, massive and angular like floating fortresses, reducing peaceful Villani settlements to smoking ruins. Children running through streets while plasma bombs fell like rain. The images had been broadcast across the galaxy, treated as entertainment by most species. "We tried to defend ourselves," Zethkara continued, her voice breaking, "but we disbanded our military forces 200 years ago. We believed that civilization meant the end of warfare. We were wrong." The hegemony representative, a tall humanoid with silver skin, spoke without requesting permission. The Villani chose pacifism. They eliminated their defense capabilities in favor of trade and diplomacy. This outcome was predictable. Several other delegates murmured agreement. Morrison felt Parker's hand on his arm, holding him in his seat. His face had gone red with anger, but he forced himself to remain silent. This wasn't his turn to speak yet. 17 of our worlds have fallen," Zethkara pressed on. "The Kruath don't just conquer territory. They take our people as slaves. Children as young as 6 years old are forced to work in their mining operations. Adults who resist are publicly executed as examples. Our elderly are left to die when they can no longer work." She activated a holographic display showing recent intelligence from the occupied worlds. The images were horrifying. Villani civilians in chains being loaded onto transport ships, mass graves outside former cities, prison camps surrounded by energy fences packed with thousands of beings living in conditions that would kill most species within weeks. The Kruath war commander, Thexel, announced his intention to use our people as breeding stock to create stronger slave populations. Zethkara said, her voice now barely above a whisper. "He called us useful genetic material in his broadcast to the galaxy." The chamber remained silent. Morrison looked around at the assembled delegates and saw the same expression on every face. Discomfort mixed with determination to avoid involvement. These were the galaxy's most advanced civilizations, species that had mastered faster-than-light travel, energy manipulation, and genetic engineering. They had the power to stop the Kruath Empire with minimal effort. Instead, they sat in comfortable chairs and watched an entire species face extinction. The Altrani delegate spoke next, their translated voice carrying the artificial calm of their gaseous species. "The Villani situation is regrettable, but the Galactic Council cannot intervene in sovereign conflicts between member species. The Kruath Empire has not violated any interstellar laws. They're committing genocide, Morrison said, standing before he could stop himself. Parker tried to pull him back down, but he shook her off. The council moderator, a multi-armed being from the Zentari Collective, gestured for order. The Earth representative will have his opportunity to speak during the formal response period. Morrison sat down, his jaw clenched. He watched Zethkara continue her plea, describing atrocities that would have triggered immediate military response from any human government. Mass executions, forced labor, sexual slavery, the systematic destruction of an entire culture. The galaxy listened with the same detached interest they might show for a weather report. "We have tried everything," Zethkara said. "We offered the Kruath our entire treasury in exchange for peace. They took our money and continued their attacks. We offered them our technology, our trade routes, our scientific knowledge. They took it all and demanded our submission. We have nothing left to offer except our lives." She collapsed to her knees on the speaking platform, her strength finally giving out. The two other Volani delegates rushed to help her, but she waved them away. "My own children are in a labor camp on Volani Prime," she whispered, her voice barely picked up by the microphones. "My daughter is 12 years old. My son is 8. The Kruath use children in their deep minds because they can fit in smaller spaces. Most don't live more than a year in those conditions." The chamber fell completely silent. Even the most cynical delegates seemed affected by the raw desperation in her voice. But Morrison could already see them preparing their responses. Expressions of sympathy, calls for diplomatic solutions, proposals for economic sanctions that would take years to implement and accomplish nothing. The Thekri delegate clicked their mandibles in what Morrison recognized as their version of a sympathetic gesture. "Perhaps we could organize a relief effort. Food and medical supplies for the displaced populations. Relief supplies won't help people in slave camps," Morrison said loudly enough for the entire chamber to hear. The moderator called for order again, but Morrison was already standing. "Permission to address the assembly. Recognition granted to the Earth representative." Morrison walked to the speaking platform, offering his arm to help Zethkara stand. She looked up at him with eyes full of desperate hope and fear. "Ambassador," he said quietly, his voice not carrying beyond the platform. "How long do your people have?" 2 months before the core worlds fall," she whispered back. "Maybe less. The Kruath are moving faster than our projections indicated." Morrison nodded and stepped to the microphone. He looked out at the assembled delegates representing the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy. Beings with technology that seemed like magic, wisdom accumulated over thousands of years, and resources beyond imagination. All of them content to watch children die rather than risk inconvenience. "The Earth delegation has heard Ambassador Zethkara's plea," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustics. "We have reviewed the evidence of Kruath atrocities. We have considered the legal and diplomatic complexities involved." The delegates leaned forward slightly. Earth was still new to galactic politics, their opinions carrying little weight in council decisions. Most species viewed humans as primitive barbarians who had somehow stumbled into space travel. Morrison's next words would change that perception forever. "Earth remembers its friends," he said simply, "and we remember our enemies." The statement seemed mild enough that most delegates dismissed it as meaningless political rhetoric. But Zethkara understood. She had studied human history as part of her diplomatic training. She knew what humans did to those who threatened their allies. For the first time in months, the Volani ambassador smiled. The transport shuttle descended through Earth's atmosphere like a falling star. Captain Jake Morrison sat in the passenger section, staring out the window at the blue and green world below. 48 hours had passed since the Galactic Council session, and his mind kept returning to the image of Zethkara collapsing on the speaking platform. Commander Lisa Parker sat across from him, reviewing tactical reports on her datapad. "The Senate Armed Services Committee wants to see us in 3 hours, she said without looking up. "Senator Williams is already calling for a full debate on galactic intervention policy." Morrison made a sound of disgust. "While they debate, children are dying in Kruath slave camps." The shuttle touched down at Fleet Command headquarters in Colorado. Morrison had served here for 15 years, first as a junior officer during the colony wars, then as a captain during the hegemony crisis. The massive complex had been built into the side of a mountain, its walls thick enough to survive direct nuclear strikes. Admiral Kate Sullivan met them at the landing pad. She was a tall woman with gray hair and scars on her hands from the Battle of Titan Station. Morrison had served under her during the worst fighting of the colony wars, when human settlements were being wiped out by pirates and corporate armies. "How bad is it?" she asked as they walked toward the command center. "Worse than the intelligence reports indicated," Parker replied. "The Kruath aren't just conquering territory. They're systematically destroying Vellani culture, burning libraries, executing teachers, forcing children to forget their own language." They entered the war room where General Rick Henderson was waiting. The former Marine had lost his left arm fighting corporate mercenaries on Mars but refused cybernetic replacement. He said the pain helped him remember why soldiers fought. "The politicians are scared," Henderson said without greeting. 3 different ambassadors have already contacted the president's office. The Altrani threaten to cut trade relations if we interfere in Kruath territory. The hegemony is making noise about economic sanctions. Sullivan activated the main holographic display. The tactical situation in Vellani space appeared as a 3-dimensional map, with red markers showing Kruath fleet positions. 17 worlds were already marked as occupied, with Kruath symbols indicating the presence of slave labor camps. Intelligence estimates 2 million Vellani civilians are currently in captivity, Morrison reported. The Kruath are using them to mine rare elements on conquered worlds. Working conditions are deliberately lethal. They want to break the survivors psychologically before moving them to permanent breeding facilities. The room fell silent. All 4 officers had seen combat, had witnessed the worst that intelligent beings could do to each other. But the clinical efficiency of Kruath genocide was something new. Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez entered the room, carrying a stack of intelligence files. She was young for a fleet intelligence officer, but had proven herself during the Outer Colony rebellions by predicting enemy movements with uncanny accuracy. "Sir, I've completed the analysis of Kruath military doctrine," she said, spreading tactical charts across the conference table. "Their entire strategy is based on overwhelming firepower applied against stationary targets. They've never faced mobile defense or asymmetric warfare." Henderson leaned over the chart, studying ship configurations and battle formations. "They fight like they're playing a game. Everything by the book, everything predictable. Because for 3 centuries that's exactly what galactic warfare has been," Sullivan said grimly. "A gentleman's game with rules everyone follows. Orbital bombardment, formal surrender, prisoner exchanges. Nobody fights dirty anymore." Morrison pulled up footage from recent Kruath battles against minor species. The alien warships moved in perfect geometric formations, trading long-range fire with enemy vessels until one side retreated or surrendered. It was warfare as choreographed dance, following protocols established by Galactic Treaty. "They've never faced Deathworld tactics," Parker observed. "Ramming attacks, boarding actions, improvised weapons. The kind of fighting humans learned during the corporate wars." Rodriguez highlighted specific weaknesses in the Kruath formations. "Their ships are heavily armored but designed for long-range engagement. Close-quarters combat would neutralize most of their advantages. And their command structure is completely centralized. Take out the flagship and the entire fleet loses coordination." Sullivan walked to the window overlooking the landing fields where human warships sat in neat rows. The vessels looked crude compared to the elegant curves of alien designs, but they had been built for function over form. Heavy armor, redundant systems, and weapons designed to punch through anything they encountered. "The president is meeting with the full cabinet tomorrow," she said. "Senate wants a formal declaration before we commit any forces. That could take weeks." "Weeks we don't have," Morrison replied. "Rodriguez, what's the current status of Kruath expansion?" The intelligence officer consulted her datapad. "They're moving faster than projected. 3 more Vellani worlds came under attack yesterday. At current pace, they'll reach the core systems in 6 weeks, not 2 months. Henderson slammed his fist on the table. "Damn the politicians. We have ships, we have Marines, we have people dying who don't deserve it." Sullivan was quiet for several minutes, staring at the tactical displays. Finally, she turned to face the others. Article 7 of the Colonial Defense Act allows for immediate military response to humanitarian crises affecting allied populations. Morrison looked up sharply. Article 7 had been written after the Mars massacre, when corporate armies slaughtered civilian colonists while Earth politicians debated response protocols. It granted military commanders broad authority to act when civilian lives were at immediate risk. The Villani aren't technically allies, Parker pointed out. They are as of this morning, Sullivan said with a thin smile. Ambassador Zethkara signed a mutual defense pact with Earth 3 hours ago. Emergency ratification by the Colonial Affairs Committee. Henderson grinned for the first time since they had entered the room. So we're not declaring war on the Kruath Empire. We're conducting a humanitarian rescue mission to protect our allies. Rodriguez was already pulling up fleet deployment schedules. The heavy cruiser USS Vengeance is ready for immediate departure. Captain Troy Adams has been requesting a combat assignment since the Proxima incident. Adams is perfect for this, Morrison agreed. He knows how to fight dirty. Within an hour, alert signals were sounding across the Sol system. Shipyards that had been quiet since the end of the colony wars suddenly blazed with activity. The USS Vengeance led a battle group of 12 warships, each one designed for the brutal close-quarters combat that humans had perfected during their rise from Earth. Marine Colonel Beth Martinez received her orders while conducting training exercises on Luna. Her 2 regiments of Terran Marines represented the most elite fighting force humanity had ever produced. They were veterans of campaigns fought in asteroid fields on poisonous worlds and in the vacuum of space itself. Colonel, how quickly can your people be ready for deployment? Sullivan asked over the secure communication link. We're already loading the transports, Admiral, Martinez replied. My Marines have been following the Villani situation. They're eager to show the galaxy what happens when you hurt innocent people. The human fleet began assembling at the edge of the Sol system. Unlike the elegant formations favored by other species, the human ships clustered together like a pack of hunting wolves. Their hulls were scarred from previous battles, their weapon arrays practical rather than ceremonial. Captain Troy Adams stood on the bridge of the USS Vengeance, watching his crew make final preparations. His ship had been built for war, with armor thick enough to ram through enemy vessels and weapons designed to function at point-blank range. Sir, reported Commander Nick Barnes from the tactical station, all ships report ready for hyperspace jump. Marine transports are loaded and secured. Adams activated the fleet communication system. All vessels, this is Vengeance Actual. Our mission is simple. The Kruath Empire has made war on innocent civilians. They've enslaved children, murdered families, and committed genocide against our allies. He paused, looking out at the other ships in his battle group. Each one carried human warriors who had volunteered for a mission that could start a galactic war. The galaxy's civilized species have chosen to do nothing. They hide behind laws and treaties while children die in slave camps. Today they learn what Deathworlders do when diplomacy fails. The fleet engaged its hyperspace drives and vanished from the Sol system, carrying humanity's answer to the Kruath Empire. Behind them, Earth's politicians continued their debates about proper diplomatic protocol and the dangers of galactic intervention. But the decision had already been made by warriors who understood that some things were worth fighting for. Regardless of the political consequences, Morrison stood in Fleet Command's observation deck, watching the last ships disappear into hyperspace. Parker joined him at the window. Think the galaxy is ready for this? She asked. Morrison remembered Zethkara's broken voice describing her children in Kruath slave camps. The galaxy's about to learn what humans do to protect our friends. War Commander Thexel relaxed in his command throne aboard the massive dreadnought Bloodclaw, reviewing reports from his latest conquest. The Villani world of Kethamara had fallen 3 days ago, adding another 2 million slaves to his growing collection. The conquest had proceeded exactly according to Kruath military doctrine, with orbital bombardment followed by ground occupation and the establishment of processing centers. The bridge of his flagship buzzed with quiet activity as crew members monitored conquered territories and planned the next phase of expansion. Thexel found the routine almost boring after decades of similar campaigns. The galaxy's lesser species always followed the same pattern when faced with Kruath superiority: initial resistance, desperate diplomacy, and finally submission to the inevitable. War Commander. His aide approached with a data tablet. Surveillance reports indicate unusual ship movement in the outer system. Configuration unknown, but they appear to be moving at impossible velocities. Thexel barely glanced at the tactical display showing his fleet's positions around the conquered Villani world. 18 heavy cruisers and 47 support vessels maintained a defensive perimeter, exactly as doctrine required. Behind them, the planet's surface sparkled with the lights of new slave processing facilities. Probably refugees attempting to flee the system, he said dismissively, or perhaps one of the council races making a symbolic gesture. Standard protocol. Transmit surrender demands and destroy any vessel that refuses compliance. The Kruath fleet had perfected this routine over 3 centuries of expansion. Enemy ships would appear, receive formal warnings about entering sovereign territory, then either retreat or face destruction. The galaxy's civilized species had long ago accepted that warfare followed established rules and protocols. Captain Troy Adams stood on the bridge of the USS Vengeance as his fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Villani system. 12 human warships materialized in perfect attack formation, their hulls scarred from previous battles and their weapon arrays already powering up for combat. Tactical analysis complete, reported Commander Nick Barnes from his station. Kruath battle formation matches intelligence projections exactly. Heavy ships in defensive screen pattern with civilian infrastructure positioned behind them as shields. Adams studied the holographic display showing enemy positions. The Kruath had arranged their fleet in textbook defensive formation, each ship positioned to provide overlapping fields of fire against attackers approaching from expected vectors. It was the kind of setup that would stop any conventional assault cold. They're thinking like civilized beings, Adams observed with a grim smile. That's their first mistake. Lieutenant Karen Hill monitored communications from her station. Sir, we're receiving standard surrender demands from the enemy flagship. They're ordering us to withdraw from sovereign Kruath territory or face destruction. Send them our response, Adams ordered. Tell them we're here for our friends. The human fleet began accelerating toward the Kruath defensive line at speeds that should have been impossible for vessels of their mass. The ship's reinforced hulls and advanced inertial dampeners allowed maneuvers that would tear apart any other spacecraft in the galaxy. Aboard the Bloodclaw, sensor operator Kexley stared at his displays in confusion. War Commander, the unknown vessels are not following standard approach patterns. They're accelerating directly toward our defensive line at ramming speed. Thexel looked up from his reports with mild annoyance. Ramming speed? What primitive species still attempts such crude tactics? He activated the main tactical display and studied the approaching ships. They must be experiencing navigation failures. Target their engines and prepare boarding parties to take prisoners. The war commander had seen similar desperation moves before. When facing inevitable defeat, some species would attempt suicide attacks in hopes of taking a few Kruath vessels with them. Such efforts were always futile against superior Kruath technology and tactics. Sir, Kexley reported, his voice rising with alarm, the unknown vessels are not reducing speed. Impact in 47 seconds. Impossible, Thexel snarled. No ship can survive collision at those velocities. They must be unmanned drones. But as the human fleet closed the final distance, detailed scans revealed crew signatures aboard each vessel. These were not suicide drones but fully crewed warships conducting an attack that violated every principle of civilized warfare. The USS Vengeance struck the Kruath defensive line like a meteor hitting tissue paper. The human ship's reinforced bow tore through the hull of a Kruath heavy cruiser, its momentum carrying it completely through the enemy vessel before emerging on the other side. The alien ship split in half, its crew compartments venting atmosphere and debris into space. All ships execute hunter-killer protocol, Adams ordered as his vessel carved through the enemy formation. We go through them, not around them. The remaining human ships followed their flagship through the gap, each one targeting a different Kruath vessel for close-range engagement. The aliens had never experienced warfare at such proximity, their weapons designed for long-range bombardment rather than point-blank combat. Kruath Captain Vorthol watched in horror as a human destroyer materialized alongside his cruiser, so close that he could see individual crew members through the enemy ship's armored viewports. What are they doing? He screamed at his weapons officer. The human ship fired shaped charges that punched through his vessel's hull like paper. Moments later, armored figures began pouring through the breach, their powered suits allowing them to operate in the vacuum of space between ships. Marine Captain Pete Collins led the first boarding action in galactic history, his assault team moving through the Kruath ship's corridors with practiced efficiency. The alien crew had never prepared for close-quarters combat aboard their own vessels. Their training focused on operating sophisticated weapon systems from the safety of armored command centers. Contact left, called Sergeant Ray Murphy, raising his assault rifle as Kruath soldiers rounded a corner. The aliens wore ceremonial armor designed more for intimidation than protection. Their energy weapons optimized for long-range combat against similarly equipped opponents. The firefight lasted less than 30 seconds. Cruath energy weapons designed for precise targeting at extended range proved useless in the confined spaces of ship corridors. Human kinetic weapons developed for the brutal urban warfare of Earth's corporate conflicts cut through alien armor like it wasn't there. Bridge secured, Collins reported over the communication network. Enemy command crew eliminated or captured. Similar scenes played out across the Cruath fleet as human boarding parties seized control of one alien vessel after another. The Cruath had never developed tactics for repelling boarders because no civilized species had attempted such barbaric methods for centuries. War Commander Thexel found himself trapped on his own bridge as human soldiers cut through the armored doors with plasma torches. His personal guard, elite warriors trained in formal dueling techniques, fell within minutes to enemies who fought with the practical brutality of apex predators. "You cannot do this," he gasped as Collins removed his helmet, revealing the scarred face of a veteran Marine. "There are rules, protocols established by Galactic Treaty. Your people are enslaving children," Collins replied, his voice cold with controlled anger. "Our rules are different." The battle for control of Cruath fleet lasted 6 hours. When it ended, 16 alien warships had been destroyed, captured, or disabled. The survivors broadcast desperate retreat signals as they fled toward the system's edge, abandoning their ground forces and processing facilities on the planet below. Admiral Sullivan monitored the battle from Fleet Command on Earth, watching tactical displays that showed human forces achieving impossible victory against numerically superior enemies. "Casualty reports?" she asked her aide. 17 wounded, none killed, came the reply. The Cruath were completely unprepared for close-quarters combat. But the real battle was just beginning. The liberated Volani world still held millions of civilians in Cruath processing camps, guarded by ground forces who had threatened to execute prisoners rather than surrender. Captain Adams stood on his damaged bridge, looking down at the planet where slave camps dotted the surface like infected wounds. "Colonel Martinez, are your Marines ready for surface operations?" The voice of the Marine commander crackled over the communication system from her assault transport. "Sir, my people have been ready since we left Earth. Time to show these aliens what Deathworlders do when you threaten innocence." Adams smiled grimly as he watched the first wave of drop pods launching toward the planet's surface. The Cruath ground commander was about to learn that humans had very different ideas about acceptable casualties when innocent lives were at stake. "All surface teams, execute liberation protocol," Adams ordered. "Bring our people home." The galaxy had never seen anything like what was about to unfold on the surface of the former Volani world. The age of civilized warfare was ending, replaced by something far more primitive and infinitely more effective. The Deathworlders had arrived, and they brought the kind of justice that could only be delivered at the point of a gun. Ground Commander Vextar watched the strange objects falling from orbit through his command bunker's reinforced windows. The primitive projectiles weren't following normal ballistic paths like proper bombardment ordnance. Instead, they seemed to be changing direction, dodging his defensive fire, and landing with impossible precision around his fortified positions. "Status report," he barked at his sensor operator, trying to maintain the calm authority expected of Cruath military leadership. "Unknown contacts confirmed as individual insertion pods," came the nervous reply. "Estimated 150 units deployed across the primary processing facility perimeter." Vextar had commanded ground operations on 17 conquered worlds over the past decade. He had never encountered anything like individual soldiers being deployed from orbit in personal craft. Civilized warfare involved large-scale troop transports landing at designated zones, followed by formal advance and engagement according to established protocols. "Impossible," he said, studying the tactical displays. No species would risk personnel in such crude delivery systems. The first drop pod cracked open like a metallic flower 200 meters from the outer perimeter fence. Sergeant Danny Torres emerged from the smoking crater, his powered armor systems automatically adjusting to the planet's gravity and atmospheric conditions. Around him, 50 other Marines were climbing out of their own pods, each one checking weapons and equipment with the practiced efficiency of veterans. Torres had fought in the outer colony rebellions where corporate Armies used civilian shields and executed prisoners to break resistance morale. He understood exactly what kind of enemy they were facing here. Through his helmet display, he could see the processing facility sprawling across several square kilometers, surrounded by energy fences and guard towers. Alpha Squad, sound off, he ordered over the tactical network. Lopez here, systems green. Johnson ready to rock. Martinez locked and loaded. 12 voices confirmed readiness as the squad moved toward the facility perimeter. Intelligence reports indicated over 40,000 Villani civilians were imprisoned in the complex, working in the deep mines that honeycombed the planet's crust. The Kruath had designed their processing facilities according to standard doctrine for controlling slave populations. High walls, automated defenses, and strategic placement of guard posts to oversee maximum numbers of prisoners with minimum personnel. The system worked perfectly against unarmed civilians but had never been tested against determined assault troops. Torres reached the outer fence and placed shaped charges at precise intervals along the energy barrier. The explosions tore gaps in the defensive perimeter, large enough for his squad to advance through without triggering the automated alarm systems. Inside the facility, Kruath Guard Captain Nethval heard the distant explosions and activated general alert protocols. His security force consisted of 200 guards equipped with standard energy, weapons and trained in crowd, control techniques for managing slave populations, perimeter. Breach confirmed in Sector 7 and 12, reported his communications officer. Unknown forces are advancing on the primary barracks complex. Nethval had dealt with slave uprisings before. Desperate Villani civilians occasionally attempted to overwhelm guard positions through sheer numbers, accepting massive casualties in hopes of allowing a few prisoners to escape. Such efforts were always crushed within minutes by superior Kruath technology and training. Deploy suppression teams to both breach points, he ordered, standard protocol for prisoner revolt situations. But the advancing figures his guards encountered bore no resemblance to desperate civilian refugees. Human Marines moved through the facility compound with the lethal precision of apex predators, their armor deflecting energy weapon hits that would have killed any other species. Private Mike Lopez kicked down the door to the first prisoner barracks and found himself face to face with dozens of Villani civilians. They cowered in terror, expecting another round of beatings or selections for the deep mines. Many were children, their blue skin marked with scars from Kruath punishment whips. Easy, folks, Torres said, his translator converting his words to the local language. Earth Marines. We're here to take you home. A small Villani girl, perhaps 8 years old, stepped forward on trembling legs. Her large eyes were filled with a mixture of hope and disbelief that made Torres's chest tighten with anger. Are you the angels from the old stories? She whispered. Torres knelt down to bring himself to her eye level, his armored bulk somehow managing to seem gentle rather than threatening. Close enough, kid. What's your name? Scylla, she said, reaching out to touch his battle-scarred helmet with one small finger. Well, Scylla, we're going to get you and everyone else out of here, Torres promised. But I need you to be brave for just a little longer while we take care of the bad people. The child nodded solemnly, then surprised him by hugging his armored leg. Around the barracks, other Villani prisoners were beginning to understand that rescue had finally arrived. Colonel Beth Martinez coordinated the broader assault from her command post near the landing zone. Intelligence indicated the Kruath had distributed prisoners across 17 different facilities on this world alone, using them as human shields to deter any possible rescue attempts. Any civilized military would be forced to negotiate for prisoner releases, accepting Kruath terms to avoid civilian casualties. But Martinez had commanded Marine operations during the corporate wars, where enemy forces routinely used civilian shields and executed hostages to break human resolve. She knew that sometimes the only way to save innocent lives was through superior violence applied without hesitation. All teams, execute precision protocol, she ordered over the command network. We go in hard, we go in fast, and we bring everyone home. The Marines advanced through the facility complex like a force of nature. Kruath guards found themselves facing enemies who fought with tactics they had never encountered and weapons designed for the brutal urban warfare of Earth's history. Corporal Sarah Kim led her fire team through the mining complex where Villani children as young as 6 years old were forced to work in conditions that killed most within months. The Kruath overseer tried to use a group of prisoners as shields. threatening to execute them if the Marines didn't withdraw. Kim's response was a precisely aimed shot that took off the alien's weapon hand without harming any of the hostages. "Anyone else want to make threats?" she asked the remaining guards. The firefight for the processing facility lasted 18 hours. When it ended, 40,000 Volani civilians had been liberated from conditions that violated every standard of civilized behavior. 3,000 Kruath personnel were dead, captured, or had fled into the surrounding wilderness. The rescued prisoners told horrifying stories of systematic torture, forced breeding programs, and the deliberate murder of anyone too weak to work. Children described watching their parents beaten to death for minor infractions. Adults spoke of being forced to choose which of their children would be sent to the deadliest mining operations. Marine medics worked around the clock to treat injuries and malnutrition among the freed slaves. Many of the Volani had been imprisoned for months, surviving on starvation rations and living in conditions designed to break their spirits. How many more facilities like this? Martinez asked her intelligence officer while watching medical teams evacuate the most severely injured prisoners. Preliminary scans indicate 47 additional processing sites across this system, Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez reported. Total estimated prisoner population exceeds 2 million beings from multiple species. Martinez looked up at the stars where she knew other Kruath fleets were conducting similar operations against defenseless civilian populations. The galaxy's civilized species sat in comfortable chambers debating diplomatic solutions while children died in slave camps. "Signal Fleet Command," she ordered. "Tell Admiral Sullivan we're going to need more ships." Captain Adams received the transmission aboard the USS Vengeance as his fleet prepared to depart for the next target system. The tactical display showed 16 more Kruath-occupied worlds with confirmed slave facilities, each one holding hundreds of thousands of innocent beings. Colonel Martinez reports successful liberation of primary facility, his communications officer announced. 40,000 civilians freed, minimal friendly casualties. Adams nodded grimly as he studied intelligence reports from other systems. The Kruath Empire controlled over 50 worlds with confirmed slave operations. Conservative estimates suggested they were holding nearly 10 million beings from dozens of different species. "Set course for the Drakmor system," he ordered. "Time to pay another house call." The human fleet jumped to hyperspace, carrying news that would reshape galactic politics forever. Word of the liberation was already spreading through underground networks, reaching other oppressed populations and inspiring hope where none had existed before. But it was also reaching the ears of the galaxy's established powers, who watched with growing alarm as primitive Deathworlders demonstrated that sometimes the only answer to evil was superior violence delivered without mercy or hesitation. The age of consequences had begun, and humanity was just getting started. 6 months after the first liberation, the Galactic Council chamber buzzed with nervous energy as delegates from 47 species gathered for an emergency session. The ornate hall that had once dismissed Volani pleas now trembled under the weight of reports flowing in from across the galaxy. Ambassador Jake Morrison walked through the chamber doors, flanked by Admiral Kate Sullivan and Captain Troy Adams. The human delegation moved with quiet confidence, their military escorts wearing battle decorations earned during the systematic dismantling of the Kruath Empire. The assembled delegates watched with barely concealed fear as the humans took their assigned seats. Over the past months, reports had flooded in from 17 star systems where human fleets had appeared without warning, destroyed Kruath military forces, and liberated millions of enslaved beings. The Altrani delegate was first to speak, his gaseous form swirling with agitation inside his containment pod. The human military actions represent the most serious violation of galactic law in recorded history. They have attacked sovereign territory, ignored diplomatic protocols, and conducted warfare using barbaric methods banned for centuries. Morrison stood slowly, his expression calm as accusations filled the air around him. The chamber had changed since that day when Zethkara collapsed pleading for help. Now the same species that had turned away from genocide sat in judgment of those who had stopped it. "Violations of galactic law," Morrison repeated, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustics. "Tell me, honored delegates, which law protects children from being worked to death in slave mines?" The hegemony representative, a tall being with silver skin and cold eyes, rose from his seat. The Kruath Empire was a recognized member of this council operating within sovereign territory. Your species had no legal authority to intervene in their internal affairs. Admiral Sullivan activated a holographic display that filled the center of the chamber. Images appeared showing the liberation of slave camps, the rescue of civilian populations, and the systematic evidence of Crueth atrocities that had been ignored by the galactic community for decades. Internal affairs, Sullivan said, her voice sharp with controlled anger. These are the internal affairs you chose to ignore. The display showed Villani children barely old enough to walk being forced into mining tunnels too narrow for adult bodies. It showed mass graves filled with beings who had died from overwork and deliberate neglect. It showed breeding facilities where captured civilians were treated like livestock. Several delegates turned away from the images, but Morrison's voice forced their attention back to the evidence. Over 3 million beings from 26 different species were enslaved by the Crueth Empire. Your response was to offer diplomatic protests and economic sanctions that would take years to implement. The chamber fell silent as more images appeared. Human Marines carrying rescued children to medical transports, freed slaves embracing family members they thought were dead, former prison camps being converted into refugee centers and hospitals. Ambassador Zethkara rose from the Villani delegation, her voice strong for the first time since Morrison had known her. The Villani Federation formally requests permanent military alliance with the Terran Federation. We have learned what happens when good beings choose to do nothing while evil flourishes. One by one, smaller species began standing in support of the alliance proposal. The Karathi, whose mining colonies had been raided by Crueth slave ships for decades. The peaceful Zenthari, who had lost 3 entire worlds to Crueth expansion. The insectoid Meltak, whose queen had been captured and held in a Crueth breeding facility. The Thekri delegate clicked his mandibles in what Morrison recognized as their species' expression of approval. The humans demonstrated that protection of innocence transcends political convenience. The Thekri Confederation requests inclusion in this defensive alliance, but the established powers were not prepared to accept this challenge to the existing order. The hegemony delegate made a threat that would reshape galactic politics forever. If humanity continues this aggressive expansion of influence, the major powers will have no choice but to respond with coordinated military action. The chamber fell completely silent. Captain Adams leaned back in his chair and laughed, a sound that sent chills through every delegate present. The laugh carried no humor, only the cold amusement of a predator facing prey that still thought it was dangerous. "You're welcome to try," Adams said, his voice carrying across the silent chamber. "But remember, we're the species that survived Earth." Morrison stood and addressed the assembly with words that would be quoted in history books for centuries to come. For 300 years, this galaxy has operated under a simple principle: the strong prey upon the weak, while the civilized look away and call it politics. He gestured toward the images still floating in the chamber's center. You built a system that rewards predators and punishes those who defend innocence. You created laws that protect the rights of slavers and ignore the screams of children. Admiral Sullivan joined Morrison at the speaking platform, her scarred hands visible to every delegate in the chamber. The Terran Federation offers the galaxy a choice. Species that prey on innocent beings will face our response. Those who protect their people and respect their neighbors will find us valuable allies. The Karathi ambassador was the first to formally request alliance membership. The Karathi Republic has watched human forces in action. When our mining colony on Zerion was attacked by pirates, Terran Marines arrived within 48 hours. No demands for payment, no political negotiations. They simply eliminated the threat and offered medical aid to our wounded. Similar testimonials came from a dozen other species. The humans had not limited their interventions to the Crueth conflict. Wherever innocents faced oppression, human ships had appeared with offers of assistance backed by overwhelming military capability. But the established powers were already planning their response. The Altrani delegate transmitted coded messages to his government, while the hegemony representative coordinated with other major species. They would not allow a species of primitive Deathworlders to upset the careful balance of galactic politics. Morrison seemed to read their thoughts as he delivered humanity's final message to the Council. Some of you are already planning military action against Earth and our allies. You believe that your advanced technology and superior numbers will allow you to restore the old order. He smiled with the same cold confidence that had characterized every human military action since the liberation began. You're operating under a fundamental misunderstanding about what kind of species you're dealing with. Captain Adams stood beside his admiral and ambassador, representing the military force that had already proven capable of dismantling established empires. We didn't come from a peaceful world where problems were solved through committee discussions and diplomatic protocols. We evolved on a planet that tried to kill us every single day. The chamber erupted in angry voices as delegates realized that humanity was not merely refusing to back down, but was actively challenging the entire structure of galactic civilization. The comfortable world where major powers could ignore atrocities committed by their allies was ending. Morrison raised his hand for silence, and the chamber gradually quieted. When he spoke again, his words carried the weight of absolute conviction. The age of consequence has begun. From this day forward, species that choose to harm innocents will face the response of those who have decided that some things are worth fighting for. The human delegation filed out of the chamber, leaving behind a collection of terrified politicians and grateful survivors. Behind them, new alliances were forming among species that had learned the difference between civilization that protects the weak and civilization that enables the strong to prey upon them. As the chamber doors closed, Ambassador Zethkara stood at the Villani delegation table and spoke words that would define the new galactic order. The aliens begged for aid. The Deathworlders delivered justice. The galaxy would never be the same.